Well, first of all, thank you for installing me as the chair of the committee, and I'll try and make sure that things are done in an orderly manner, and we scrutinise on a non-political basis, which I think is what we should be doing as a over and scrutiny committee, and it certainly worked well from that perspective last year. So the next thing on the agenda is appointment of vice chair, and I would like to nominate Councillor Michael Winstanley. Any seconds?
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to second Councillor Winstanley as Vice Chair of this Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Susan. Are you all in favour? Okay, thank you. Therefore, Michael, you are the Vice Chair.
Thank you.
One thing besides my note, I prefer to use your Christian names rather than no sort of. So it's Susan rather than Councillor Howard. So if you're happy with that, I think we're all, say, working together professionally. So I think it does work actually. So the next thing we need to note the membership for 2019. That's in the pack, I presume. Yeah. So we've got. Do I need to read this out? Yeah, okay, I will do. Yeah. It's Councillor Midassa Dean from Bolton, Councillor Susan House from Bolton, Councillor Mary Whitby from Bury, Councillor Luke Rakes from Manchester, Councillor June Hitcham from Manchester, Councillor George Hume from Oldham, Councillor Daniel Meredith for Rochdale, Councillor Michael Hawley from Rochdale. Salford we didn't have, but we've now got that now, which is Councillor Jim King from Salford. Councillor Kerry Walters from Stockport, Councillor Colin McAllister from Stockport, Councillor Stephen Homer from Tameside, Councillor Barry Brotherton from Trafford, Councillor Charles Ruby from Wigan, and Councillor Michael Winstanley from Wigan as well. So that'll be and a full list now of members will be circulated to all of you, together with the substitute members. And obviously it's important that we get the substitute members in when. There'll be obviously occasion when you can't make the meetings. I have to say last year, some of the substitutes were absolutely brilliant in terms of stepping into the breach, which was obviously very much appreciated. Need to remind members of your obligations under the GMCA Members Code of Conduct, which is in your pack. And you also need to complete an annual declaration of interest. Now, there was some confusion last year, because obviously you do this for your own council. But because this is a separate body, you need to do one for the GMCA as well, which is similar sort of questions, not the same questions that you filled out for your own councils. But that is in the pack, and if you could hand those in, ideally today, to Emma. But if not, if you could do them as soon as possible there afterwards. Terms of reference, perhaps you can note and comment on the committee's terms of reference. So that's in the actual pack. Simon, do you want to say anything about the terms of reference? Because it hasn't changed from the past.
No, I don't think anything.
And perhaps, would you pick anything up on that in the sort of training session at the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do that.
I think might be better if you've got any observations to do it that way round. And then finally, on declaration of interest, have you got any declaration of interest in relation to any item on this particular agenda? Thank you for that. Can I ask a question for that? There was a form in the pack. Previously, we've only, I think, made declaration. I can't ever remember signing any declaration. But presumably we have to do that. And if so, if you got a nil return, do you send a nil return in? Or yes. You do now? That's what I thought, actually. Yeah. Which we didn't do previously, actually.
For the register.
Yeah.
Yes, the main register. You don't need to do one for every meeting.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, so I meant for every meeting. You don't need to do that for it. For each meeting, if it's on that particular agenda, you only need to fill in that form if you have a declaration of interest for that meeting. But if you haven't got any declaration of interest, you don't need to put none on the form.
Not now. Not for each meeting.
Okay, fine. Okay, I hope that's clarified. Right, the next thing then is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of April. Let me just turn to that. Are there any comments, for those members who are present, are there any comments on the minutes? In that case, can we approve them as a true record, please? Thank you. Right, so the next thing we've got on the list down is the work programme, which we're going to take that at the end. I think once we've had the training session we're going to have at the end, it will make sense if we come back to that in terms of the work programme. So if you're happy with that, that'd be good, great. And then we've got the next item on the agenda is the Greater Manchester Strategy Implementation Plan and Performance Update. So that's the report of Simon Noakes.
Thanks, Chair. This is the 6 monthly update that members who've been on the committee before were used to receiving. Effectively, through the work on the Greater Manchester Strategy, we agreed an overall strategy 2 years ago, or nearly 2 years ago, and we said that we needed to have a very clear way of monitoring the progress on that strategy. That was about setting very clear targets within the overall Greater Manchester Strategy, and then looking at two things on a 6 monthly basis. Firstly, was how were we progressing towards those targets, and secondly, within the implementation plan, we set out a range of activities that needed to be undertaken in order to make the progress that we wanted to towards the targets. And the implementation plan update looks at the progress we're making on those activities. So for each priority, you have to say two things. One is a kind of dashboard of data, looking at where all the metrics are moving, and the second is an update on the activity that we believe is essential to achieve the targets by 2020. So that's the kind of format of the dashboard. Obviously, we're saying within each scrutiny committee looks at various parts of the overall Greater Manchester Strategy, and we're saying particularly priorities 2, 3 and 4 are of relevance to this scrutiny committee, but obviously willing and happy to take comments on any of the GMS. I guess there are kind of two headline comments to make. One is, I think you'll notice through the dashboard and through the report as a whole, there is very, very substantial progress. So there's an awful lot of activity, an awful lot of the targets where we are making good progress and making good progress to where we want to be in 2020. And hopefully the format of the report with the kind of red, amber, green, and then also the arrows in terms of direction of travel is useful and gives you a snapshot of activity in relation to each of the priorities. I think the second thing, and while recognising that good performance and recognising that very substantial activity, we also recognise that there are some areas and some targets where we are not making the progress we would have wanted to. I think in those areas there are two reasons for that. One is reasons that are within our control, and the other is reasons that are out of our control. So there are some things going on nationally where it means that we're not able to make the progress we would have wanted to, but there are some things where we have more control over them, which we're not making the progress we want to. And I guess the purpose of the debate really perhaps should focus on those areas where we aren't making the progress that we want to, as I say, reflecting and recognising the progress we are making. And again, therefore, just as by way of introduction, I guess in each of the priorities we've mentioned, particularly on priority 2, we're not making the progress we wanted to around the area of NEETs, that's those not in employment, education or training, in terms of numbers of 16 and 17-year-olds. And might ask Gemma to make a comment on that as we go through the discussion. In priority 3, we're clearly not making the progress that we would have wanted to in relation to the number of people on apprenticeships, and that is very much a national issue. The volume of apprenticeships has fallen off very substantially nationally since the introduction of the apprenticeship levy. There are reasons for that, some of which are valid and good reasons, some of which are not so good reasons, and Greater Manchester broadly reflects the national picture. We're certainly not doing worse than the national picture, but our target was about number of people on apprenticeships in Greater Manchester, and therefore obviously that target is not being met at this point in time. The second area under priority 3 is the number of people claiming unemployment benefit, which again is not where we wanted it to be. And again, I might ask Matt to say a few words as part of the debate, particularly around the work we're doing around welfare reform, again, which is one of the areas of activity that's marked as needing some improvement. And in terms of priority 4, in terms of the overall kind of performance of the economy, I think the only thing I can say to that is Brexit, in the sense that although a number of the indicators are reasonably positive, everybody believes that the economy is in this kind of false position where we don't quite know what's going to happen to the economy one way or the other, depending on what the outcome of the detail of the Brexit negotiations are. So, as I say, lots of areas where the stats are kind of green. But quite a lot of the activity is amber, because we just don't know what the longer term future economic trajectory is, and that's probably the biggest thing going on in Priority 4. So I wasn't planning, Chair, to say anything more than that by way of introduction, because it's probably worth getting into individual issues that members want to raise and then having the conversation around those particular issues.
Do you want Gemma and Matt to add anything to that, or as part of the questions?
Probably as part of the questions.
Okay, right, fine. Well, in that case, questions from the committee. Susan.
Thanks, Chair. I've definitely got two, and if there's space, because I know we've only got one item, please remember me that I would have a third one. The first thing I want to ask about, I'll go straight in on apprenticeships, and obviously the clear statement in the report. You do give us one positive line, of course, and that's the higher education apprenticeships. So I want to ask firstly, do you think that's turning a corner, that area of apprenticeships? But can you give me more information on this apprenticeships action plan? Because you seem to have decided that despite us being told it's very much a national issue, you're having an action plan, a Greater Manchester action plan. I think I've got that right. Now, the second thing I want to ask about, I think, by the way, I'm talking to, that's probably an item in 3, isn't it? I think this next one falls in 4. Sorry. When I'm looking at the dashboards, I think you'll understand it's not always across the top whether I'm in 3 or 4, and I like to really concentrate on what's before me. So the other thing that stood out to me is what you say about a Greater Manchester approach to managing welfare reform. And it's there, isn't it, a submission to the spending review that's imminent, or you're going to have a proposal to the spending review. So the question is really, how much devolution do you think you might go for on that? Because my guess is, from what we've heard before, you do want to see devolution on the Department for Welfare, Work and Welfare budget, Work and Pensions budget, forgive me. And are we even possibly on track to be, I can't remember how much devolution there's been of that budget. I know, I don't just mean in Greater Manchester, I mean in other devolved areas. Do you think we might be in a position to, like we were with the NHS, where we were the first, might we be the first that gets a good chunk of devolvement from that budget? I'd like to see it. I've said that before for Greater Manchester, haven't I? I've said that just nudges as a priority for me above the devolvement of finance for education. Thank you.
Chair, I'll probably ask Gemma and Matt to answer those two issues respectively in terms of the Apprenticeship Action Plan and also what we're doing around the welfare reform, and probably also touching on the Work and Health Programme, which is a very substantial part of welfare reform devolution in that sense, in terms of the work we're doing with Job Centre Plus.
Okay, thank you. And I think, as Simon said, there's a lot going on nationally in terms of apprenticeship numbers, and what we've been doing across Greater Manchester is monitoring that and really working with partners, providers, colleges, to get a real sense, an overall sense of what is happening and why things are happening. So a lot of people will blame the levy. It's one factor, it's not the only factor that is going on across apprenticeship reform. You're absolutely right. We in Greater Manchester have seen an increase in our higher level apprenticeships, which is fantastic given the launch of the local industrial strategy yesterday. It's a positive, but it's also counteracted with, is that just because there are businesses upskilling their current staff? So there's a little bit of that. The cost of apprenticeships has changed. We are seeing reductions in younger people and the kind of level 2, level 3 level apprenticeships. So taken together, it does have an impact on some of the other things that Simon said around reducing NEETs as well. So we are taking that in the main. In terms of the Apprenticeship Action Plan, this hasn't changed from the last time we took it to scrutiny, so we've done it as visual, and we can share that again. And what we've tried to say is, we know what the issues are, we're trying to monitor them, but actually as Greater Manchester and its partners, we are trying to counteract them. So one of the really positive things that scrutiny will have seen is trying to increase apprenticeship take-up in SMEs. So we've been working with each of the local authorities and we've provided a grant to each of the local authorities and a package of support around SMEs, bringing in the chamber, bringing in the growth company and bringing in providers to try and understand kind of what is the barrier, can we reduce the barriers for people taking on apprenticeships, and providing grants to those SMEs. So that's a real positive. We're also looking at trying to improve the quality of apprenticeships and working with training providers in that, because again, you know, we want to see the best, highest quality provision in Greater Manchester. We've also got the public sector apprenticeship approach, whereby we are booking some of the trends actually in terms of the levy. And we've got really good high quality providers, and we've got local authorities and fire and health and police pooling together and actually kind of getting economies of scale out of the levy and spending the levy, because nobody wants to give that back to Treasury. So I can share the action plan again, but it's based on all of those things that you'll have heard in the press, and actually what can we do in Greater Manchester to react to that with all of our partners, not just the CA. So I hope that answers your questions, but I will share that again, because it's a really good kind of just quite an easy few slides that you can see all the activity.
Forgive me, Chairman, we've got the very important business of submission to spending review and welfare reform. And
okay, it's okay. I'll touch on where we are in terms of employment support and devolution, and then which ties in with the spending review. So the first point is we probably do have greater devolution of employment support welfare in Greater Manchester than other parts of England. And there are a few things actually I wanted to kind of touch on in terms of how that's expanded so far and plans for that to expand going forward. If I use kind of working well as an example of around employment support, so we've had kind of programs in place since 2014 focused on people out of work on health-related benefits, furthest away from the labour market, which has culminated in what is now the kind of £52 million work and health programme. But through devolution, both in terms of employment devolution, but also health and social care devolution, that approach is extended to other groups who we know are at risk due to welfare reform and economic shock around people who are in work but off sick, at risk of falling out of the labour market through our newly launched early help programme, which is the first of its kind in this country. But we're also about to go further in terms of those who are at significant risk due to, which has been discussed here previously, with learning disabilities, severe mental illness, and autism. So we're looking for a devolved programme to go to be launched later this year. But two areas which I think are really of real interest, which pick up the welfare reform, and it's certainly universal credit and in-work conditionality, or the kind of in-work impacts of universal credit. We are working on two new working well programmes, one around in-work progression, and one around people who are self-employed, who may be subject to in-work conditionality or universal credit, which is an area that we've not focused on before, which is really useful actually in terms of helping shape government's thinking around how it works with people who are in work but on low pay, but also in terms of our response in Greater Manchester. Just a couple of other points about welfare reform more broadly. We are looking at universal support, so the kind of help to claim offer for people. So previously that was delivered by local authorities, whether that's around digital support for people who are around financial advice, and it was given to CAB, Citizens Advice, to manage. That funding comes to an end in March. So we're working with government. Well, we would like to put a proposal to government about the future funding of that to be continued, as well as the future funding for work and health programme, and also in some discussions with government around managed migration of people on employment support allowance into universal credit. So we had meetings only yesterday with the Director General of Universal Credit with DWP about how we might look at a more localised approach to that. So a few things kind of on the boil.
in there.
Thanks, Chair. Just, I think, two brief comments. To a certain extent, of course, this report is overtaken a little bit by the local industrial strategy now being launched, which I know you've got on your next agenda, so to pick up on that. But one of the elements within the work that came out of the Independent Prosperity Review looked quite specifically at the relationship between health and productivity, and clearly that will be something that will be picked up within that implementation plan. I think the second thing I want to say is that before elections, or before we went into the PERDA period, the Combined Authority did publish a public sector service reform white paper, which again is about trying to re-energise about how we are able to effectively not just integrate health and social care, but a whole range of services in order to be able to support people, in particular those people in greatest level of needs, including the ability to get people back into work that aren't in work. But I also say, although that's a Combined Authority white paper, delivery of that is principally a district function, not a CA function.
Michael, did you have a question there? I wasn't. Simon was pointing over there, and I thought it was you, because obviously it was Matt rather than you. More questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, Susan, by all means, yes, by all means.
I brought a third, just in case. I didn't think I'd get a chance to ask it. Forgive me, I can't remember whether it's area 3 or 4, and it is quite a broad question. So I want to just again understand the difference between the three, what I call the three government co-produced industrial strategies. I suppose it's quite timely that I'm asking this. I know we've seen the work up here before, but I don't think I've heard enough about the differences between West Midlands, what they're calling OXLEP and GM. Now, of course, I've listened very carefully here, so I'm not necessarily meaning things like, well, graphene and maybe the health innovation, because that makes enormous sense. But is there anything else anybody would want to say about the differences between the three of them, and why the GM one is the best industrial roadmap, if you like, for GM? Thank you, because it's in the paper, this.
Who wants to tell that? To Richard or Simon?
I've not read the West Midlands one or the other one. In fact, I don't think the other one's been published yet, so it'll only be a draft. But so I'll leave that bit to Simon. I'll say one thing that is very distinctive about the Greater Manchester Local Industrial Strategy compared to the other two, and likely to be compared with any of the others that are coming out, is the work of the Independent Prosperity Review and the proposals that have come out of that. I don't think there is anywhere else that has put the same emphasis on producing the evidence base of that commissioned research that goes along with that. And I think out of that commissioned research, some really sort of innovative, quite challenging ideas, I have to say, but really innovative ideas.
You make a very valid point there about an evidence-based strategy. Very much so.
Yeah, just pick up on a couple of other issues. The Oxford Cambridge one hasn't been published yet, and I know that there were some issues around it, so I haven't got a timeline on when that is likely to be published. West Midlands was published. I think the difference, as well as the evidence base, as Richard has mentioned, I think the other issue is certainly the West Midlands one that I've read, or my kind of reading of it. It talks about what West Midlands is doing in absolutely every sector of the economy, whereas actually within Greater Manchester we've kind of categorised our kind of frontier sectors, as we describe them, the 4 sectors where we genuinely have got global strengths and where we can genuinely add to UK's economic growth, and then we talk about issues that we need to tackle to unleash the growth within Greater Manchester around very specifically around infrastructure and transport connectivity as part of that, very specifically around a 9-month piece of work with DFE and DWP on skills and work system and how we can make that better. Very specifically about what we're going to do around leadership and management and issues of innovation adoption in terms of the productivity agenda. So my view would be that we have got a very robust evidence-based challenging industrial strategy. And I think the thing I would certainly kind of celebrate in that sense is that it is robust, it is challenging, it is ambitious, and it is jointly with government. And I think that was always our worry, is could we achieve both things? Could we get government buy-in to what we were trying to achieve, as well as keeping it really bold and ambitious? I think we've managed to do that, rather than just being a description of the economy, as it were.
Any more questions? Mary?
Can I ask a question about the digital strategy? And I could be wrong here, but I understand we've now got 5G within Greater Manchester, but there are parts of the region that haven't even got basic internet connection, and that anybody trying to get fibre optics or connected into the internet is having problems. And I'm not talking about somebody in the country in north of Bury, I'm talking about a building that's just outside the city centre of Manchester. And I wondered if there were lots of issues about getting connectivity across the whole of the region and not just the centres.
So there are a number of things going on here. There's in terms of connectivity, fibre connectivity. There was a programme of upgrading broadband across the conurbation, which covered 8 of the 10 districts, and the reason it covered 8 it excluded Manchester and Salford. This was about 3 or 4 years ago, probably longer actually now. It excluded those 2 districts because they were regarded as urban, and the other 8 districts were regarded as rural from the European Commission's point of view. The issue about intervening in the broadband market is one of state aid. So there are certain things that we are allowed to do and certain things that we're not allowed to do. So that programme covered 8 of the 10, which is where some of the issues arose in terms of Manchester and Salford connectivity for basic broadband. What we're about to do, and we're in the process of doing at the moment, is rolling out through money that we've won through Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Digital culture, media and sport. £23 million we've won from them to roll out fibre connectivity across Greater Manchester more fully, and that will connect public sector premises. It won't connect private sector businesses or individuals, but it will connect public sector premises. But that will lay a fibre spine, if you like, on which other activity can happen. So that's one thing that we're doing, and that will cover the whole of Greater Manchester. So all 10 districts are involved in that. Tameside have got a slightly different approach because of work they've previously done, but that activity will cover all parts of Greater Manchester. The other thing we're doing, and this will be published in probably July time, is producing what we're calling a Greater Manchester Prospectus, but it's effectively about a common approach across Greater Manchester to the way in which fibre is laid. And so one of the big criticisms of the fibre companies is that every district has a slightly different approach to the way that they deal with them. And so the fibre companies have told us that if Greater Manchester had a common approach across the 10, and this is being developed bottom up from working with each district to agree how we can do this, if we had that common approach, that would actually make them invest in fibre on a commercial basis far more rapidly, and so that standard approach across Greater Manchester to encourage private sector investment in all parts of Greater Manchester is something that will be developed and come out later in July time.
I've got a couple actually. The first one, can I refer you to page 47? And I hope I'm interpreting this in the right way, but on the actual chart, it actually says by 2020, the proportion, it's very small printing, GM key stage 2 pupils achieved the expected level of attainment in reading, writing and maths. So it's green, it's moving in the right direction. You then go down to the supporting indicators. In GM, 21.2% of secondary schools are performing below the national floor standard at Key Stage 4. Now, if my interpretation is right, something's happening in secondary schools. So, we're doing well in primary schools, notwithstanding there are issues under Objective 1 in terms of children starting school ready to learn. There's some things that need to be improved in that area. But something seems to be happening, if my interpretation is right, at secondary levels, that we're losing the impetus. So we're doing well at primary level, not so well at secondary, well, in fact, not good at all, really, on these things at secondary level. First of all, is my interpretation right? Secondly, if it is right, what initiatives do we understand the reason why? And what other initiatives are in place to try and encourage, if you like, a reversal of that trend in secondary schools?
Wowzers. Your interpretation is absolutely right, and I think it's been something that's been highlighted for many years in terms of the education policy and the fact that, you know, it's not up for being devolved. It sits with the schools in terms of its funding, and it is a national policy. We work very, very closely with our Directors of Children's Services and our local authorities in this space, and it's not just the school's fault. So I think there's an awful lot of things that happen in a child's life when they start secondary school.
Absolutely.
And it's also the local industrial strategy touches on it in terms of there are 42,000 young people that are learning in requires improvement or poor secondary schools. A lot of that is to do with things like teacher retention and attraction, and government has identified this as well. If you are in deprived areas, then sometimes the teachers don't want to go there, some do. I think it'll be very, very difficult to say it's one thing, and I think it's unfair on the schools to say it would be one thing, but there is absolutely a dip between primary and secondary. Some of the things that the Combined Authority is doing is working with their schools around the Bridge GM and actually bringing businesses in and raising the aspirations of those young people, because what you can then do is raise up everybody. In terms of school improvement, it sits with the Regional Schools Commissioner at the Department for Education. They've had lots of policies whereby you're academising and all of that, and local authorities work incredibly hard. And it's just very, very difficult to pin it down. I think there is something that we need to do, and there is something that we have to start to work with our schools in a different way, I would say. We work very closely with our colleges, but actually schools have perhaps not been brought into GMS in the way that they would like to, and we are now touching on that. And I think we do need to wrap our support around secondary schools to ensure that those young people are attaining and are progressing. And, you know, all of the things that we're doing around the mentally healthy schools pilot, that all has an impact. So I think we are trying, and we should be able to start to book that trend, because you do see some phenomenal changes in terms of Ofsted gradings. But it's just a very difficult thing to say it's one thing or another. But I think working with local authorities and schools in a different way, we need to do something, and we need to challenge DFE on it as well, so that they don't just kind of say, well, education isn't up for devolution. I don't think we're asking for that. I think we're asking for more influence and convening powers to start to understand why and what we can do to help those schools for the good of the young people.
I'll bring to Richard in a second. Actually, you're absolutely right. We need to understand it. And you see things in the press how parts of London have been transformed in terms of quality. Whether or not that is right or not, or it's spinning, I can't judge that. But it's I've got a real concern on this, actually. I mean, education, as I've always been passionate about it, as a school governor, and my wife's a school teacher as well, actually. And it's the one thing in life that every child should have is the opportunity for good education to drive life forward. But what the shame is, there's some great things happening in this performance data here. But the one thing where we're struggling on is generally skills. We've already talked about apprenticeships, and I know that's a national problem. But I really think we need to get a better understanding of these things. And I take your point entirely. You've got to be careful what you do, and you must not say it's all out the school's fault. It's not. And I think, and I've seen that particularly as a governor, and I think that it's something that we possibly ought to focus on a bit this time round, this year. It's a personal view. Obviously, we'll come to that in the work programme in due course. But it's the one standout thing in this performance table where you can see things are not going as well as we would like them to go. In many other areas, the combined authority is doing so well, actually. So, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments. Certainly, on be wary about making London as a comparison. Some of the evidence around improved performance in London has got nothing to do with anything anybody's done other than having more children from first-generation immigrants who are very, very motivated within their schools, and that has increased performance in them. So that's one solution to our problem. If we can have more first-generation immigrants, it would improve our schools and no end. I know there are some people might disagree with that, but it would. Second, I think we also be clear that education isn't a combined authority function, but there is clearly now co-working between the 10 districts through the Children's Board to try and bring improvement in this area. I think the third and fourth things I would say, again, go back to the local industrial strategy and the Independent Prosperity Review. Independent Prosperity Review basically indicates that our education system in Greater Manchester overall is not functioning particularly badly. What we do have is enormous variation across Greater Manchester, and a variation that cannot always be reasonably justified, for example, by demography. So I think there is an issue about how we get that consistency, and that's within districts. It's not just between districts. So there is an issue there. But the review really put that down to effectively the dysfunctionality that exists within the education and skills system in this country. And the industrial strategy gives us a 9-month window of engaging with the Department for Education to see if we can come up with a more sensible way of running things. Now, whether that will achieve anything or not remains to be seen, but I think that is the first time where Department for Education have even been willing to have a meaningful engagement on these issues. So there may well be, through that route, something that we can do to get the consistently high standards across Greater Manchester rather than the variation we've got.
I think, going forward, as I said before, subject to agreement in the committee, when we look at the work programme, I think we do need something to come back here so we can better understand, perhaps, what the issues are. And obviously, it'll vary across districts, and to what extent we can help and influence things in that area. The other thing I'd like to note, actually, is on priority 3, and that's with regard to medium pay that residents earn. And I have to say, we look at things like, comparison of GM with England, and we're behind, but within that, there's some staggering sort of variations across the individual boroughs. And regrettably, Rochdale, where I represent, is one of the worst. And I think, more granularity perhaps in some of the figures to understand what the issues are there might be helpful as, again, another exercise going forward. I think in these charts there is some good information about the individual boroughs. And we've asked for this in the past, but I unfortunately couldn't get into the online performance dashboard. My council computer is not working, unfortunately. But it's the implication, I think, from the report is that there is more information between, if you like, the individual authorities actually recorded in the online dashboard. And is that, am I right in thinking that?
Yes, Chair, absolutely. All of the dashboard data, so the tables at the start of each of the priorities rather than the kind of activity data, all the dashboard data is online in an interactive package called Tableau, which the link takes you to. And for many of these data sets, you can click on an individual borough, and then you can click on wards within that borough, and you can actually look at historic data, you can look at trend data, you can compare it with the England average, you can compare it with the UK average. So it's actually very interactive, and you can play with it as you wish to answer the specific question that you want to look at. So that is available. And if there are data that you feel you want, having looked at that tableau that you haven't got access to, let us know and we'll see whether it's available.
That's brilliant. And we've got automatic access to Tableau, have we?
Yeah, it's through the link.
Just through that link. Brilliant. Okay, that's good. Sorry, I've wrote it down there. It's June, isn't it? Sorry, you're obviously new at the committee. I'll know for next time round. June.
Not a problem, thank you. It was just on clarity because I was looking at the schools, how they are engaging in the colleges, but you don't give us a clear indication of how many schools. So you give it, for instance, 170 schools and colleges were engaged with the Bridge GM Career Portal, but you don't say how many out of that. So you've not given us a starting point. So I'm just wondering how many haven't been engaged, you know, and could we have further information, and then what's going to happen to ensure that they do try to engage with that portal to get young people into employment and education and career advice.
Yeah, apologies. I think that's we need to just make sure that new members have got all of the information from kind of previous sessions. So there are 234 schools and colleges from secondary up to our kind of sixth form colleges across Greater Manchester. So the 170 that are engaged now is fantastic and a real phenomenal movement. And then the plan is in place then to be able to reach full coverage by December. So it's a good high proportion. And then we're targeting and looking at those ones that aren't engaging and the reasons why they perhaps don't want to engage. So again, taking kind of Sir Richard's point as well, it's a good way to start to look at how you get some level kind of playing field. And the bridge stuff is a bit more softly than talking about leadership and management or school improvement. So it's a good way that we are engaging with the schools, but we'll just make sure that full data set is available.
Yes, just for clarity, Chair. I'm a bit confused with it. You know, the percentage neat and the percentage not known, and then the total. I assume those two should add. Is that right? Because they don't. Very few of them add up.
Page Colin.
Sorry, 47.
Yeah.
I suspect that they almost add up, but what you will have is rounding errors.
Is that what it is? Okay. Okay.
Any final questions? Susan?
Yeah, okay, thanks, you're letting me. What we talked about there, the variance within schools, and there was feedback. It seems to be put down, the standout issue seemed to be dysfunctionality. My heart sank a bit because I thought, can't variance sometimes be really about what I tend to call star quality, where actually and it's hard to define or scientifically, pin it down, where somebody is just so highly motivated and the right person, they go into a school or a brilliant head, or it might not be the head, it might be some tip-top fantastic teachers or something, and they just up performance. Now, and this business of, star quality, it's not just a feature that could be occurring where you get some outliers of very effective outcomes, not just in education. I mean, it's something I've thought about across health. Certainly, I came across it actually when researchers started to describe it actually internationally around whether you can really help people get out of poor quality lifestyles who've ended up with drug addiction. So, I'm drawn to it every time. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit technical around research and why things are the way they are, but my heart sank a bit when you described it. I mean, if it's from the Independent Prosperity Review, fair enough, that the standout thing for them about the variance was dysfunctionality. Was there anything, or is there anything that tells us that sometimes it's actually because you've got outliers where there's really brilliant practice, and how on earth can we translate that further into other schools? Thanks.
I think it's undoubtedly the case that well-led schools with good teachers perform better. I think the issue is if you haven't got well-led schools or you've got a shortage of good teachers, is what you do about it, and that's where the systematic element comes into it. We don't have a system that allows us to effectively support, intervene, and so on.
Anything else? I've got one. Actually, I mean, first of all, thank you for keeping to the areas of our remit. But I've got one outside our remit, which I don't understand. And this is on page 63. It's about the improvement in performance of transport networks. And it says in here, Greater Manchester RAPs implement the recommendations coming forward from the report of GMCA in the summer, with the ultimate goal to implement a lane rental scheme in 2020-2021. What's the line rental scheme? Lane rental scheme? What is it?
It's essentially, if they want to dig it up, they have to pay for it.
Ah, right. I understand that now. Quite right too. Well, thank you for the report. I think that, as I said before, there's clearly some good progress here, but I think the members of the committee have demonstrated there are concerns over skills generally, and I think that we do need to specifically look at one or two of these areas in the ongoing reporting that you will obviously do throughout the year. Thank you. We are asked to consider the progress towards the achievement of the 2020 ambitions and targets. We've done that, and to note and comment on the updated implementation plan and performance dashboard, and we've done that. And I think we just need to note in there that we want further information coming through with regards to and to understand, if you like, some of the skills issues. The next report is on what's it gone to? Isn't it another report? It's a second report, I thought. I got this wrong.
That's been circulated separately. Information, just for skills programme.
The Work and Skills Programme update.
Yeah,
it's just for information.
Oh, it's for information. Sorry, I do apologise. Item 12, which I thought we were going to scrutinise, is for information purposes only. It's just an update on things that we discussed previously. So it's for noting, so we don't have discussions on that. So the next thing then is dates of future meetings. This has been handed out, presumably?
yes.
At the moment, what we've got is dates, if you like, that reflect the previous year's timetable. Most of the dates and meetings were on the second Friday of the month, but a few went to the third Friday of the month. And what I've suggested, you can obviously, it's a committee decision, that we ought to have consistency and to try and keep to the second Friday of the month for each of the meetings, but recognising that December may be slightly different because of Christmas. So if we can just consider that, I think we need to do that. Oh, that's the reasoning, because we need to do that on the 6th of December because the GMCA meeting's on the 13th because of Christmas. So with that one exception, I would suggest that we would keep them at the second Friday of the month and to maintain this starting time of 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Now, what's also been taken out from last year is an August meeting, because does the GMCA not meet in August?
No.
So it doesn't meet in August.
Up to the committee if you want to meet in August, but the GMCA
well, we can meet if we want to do, but I suspect with holidays and everything else, it's always a bit difficult. And also the April meeting has been taken out. Now, I have to say last year we struggled to get the quorum on the April meeting for pretty obvious reasons. So the suggestion is that we drop the August meeting and drop the April meeting, but that doesn't mean we will change the actual volume of things that we need to consider. So clearly we have a programme that we need to go at. So I don't want anybody to think that we're diluting, if not the scrutiny here. It's just it's practicalities of making sure that we get full attendance, basically. So Are you happy for those fairly minor changes on that timetable? Good, well, we can note that in place. All right, that's right. It says sure from information only to note this the GM Work and Skills Programme up. That's fine. We've also got the Brexit update in here.
Chair, just before you move off that, can I just give one very small view about meetings? Is that all right?
I'll let you indulge.
I promise. There's been occasions when we've not been able to meet here, and many of us who've served on scrutiny committees really enjoy this room. I think when we go to, this is only a personal view, when we go to town halls, it can end up tricky. We've had meetings where we've had officers sitting or politicians sitting, and then the person they're trying to talk to that's asked a question is behind them. And I struggle with that myself, you know. I mean, I can work anywhere, but I just, watching that in others is struggles. But I'm always very jealous of the setup that Manchester City has. So it's just to say that if we had to if we had to be moved from here, I'm being diplomatic, because there have been very important visitors to the GMCA building in time gone by, of course, in this room. And with, you know, if we have to be moved, I'd be grateful if we could have I don't know what, you call this a meeting style table room, don't you? I'd be really grateful if we could have a sort of, it wouldn't be a standby, would it? It would have to be planned, but anything you can get in a meeting style room rather than town hall, council chambers. Thanks so much.
Well, Susan mentioned the scrutiny room in the town hall. It's not normally used on a Friday afternoon, so again, we wouldn't need to know in advance, but we ought to be able to make that available.
A chair's urgent business item, but it's with all the uncertainty, I mean, at the moment particularly.
Chair, I don't think there's anything I want to say about it at all. Thank you.
I thought you might say that. Concludes the formal part of the meeting, and now I think we've got a session on training. But before we actually terminate this meeting, I do want to make one observation, which has just been said to me, given to me. Unfortunately, Emma's leaving. This is her last meeting.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Which I have to say, I mean, I'm exceedingly disappointed. I mean, from a personal point of view, you've kept me on the straight and narrow, actually, and been very, very helpful to me, actually. But I'm sure all the